So how do we overcome perfectionism? What do we do about it if we have it? And again, remember, there is no perfect perfectionist. There is no perfect person committed to excellence. You need to choose in your life where you're happy and where you think you can be happier. This may not even speak to you. This for you may be just interesting academically, or it may be deeply personal. So how do we become more and more of the excellence schema? First, it is about self-awareness. It's about understanding. For me, a big breakthrough was understanding, hey, I'm actually defensive, and I don't want to be defensive because I know that it hurts intimacy and relationships. And that's when I started the real work on it. And that has improved and continues to improve my relationships. Or, oh, look at my reaction to failure. Look at how afraid I am of hearing a no. Look at how afraid I am of being rejected. Look at how afraid I am of coping and trying. So being aware of it. And if you want to improve your forehand in tennis, you first need to be aware of what it is that you want to improve. So that's the first step. And that's easier said than done. So whether it's dealing with addiction or dealing with any issue in our lives, perfectionism, or whether it's improving something, first step is awareness. Second step is, there's 5 more minutes, by the way. Those of you who are looking at this clock, it's 5 minutes fast. Or 4 more minutes. 4 more minutes. Focus on and reward effort. What Carol Dweck showed was that when we focus on efforts, people's effort, we're able to change a schema that has been ingrained there and that has been there very often for years. So with ourselves or with other people, it's about focusing on the journey, focusing on and rewarding ourselves at times even for failure, for trying. And within a few hours, what Carol Dweck has seen, teaching people that their mind is malleable, teaching them actually about neuroplasticity, that it's not fixed, we can bring about change. Active acceptance. Karen Horney, whom I consider one of the mothers of positive psychology, has done a lot of work on neurosis. And one of the things that she found was that neurosis that we have never really goes away. It's always part of us. It becomes more manageable, but it's always there. And perfectionism, at the extreme, is a form of neurosis. So the thing is to accept that it will always be there. I always have the tendency for perfectionism, and it's okay. However, whereas before I was here on the extreme of perfectionism, now I'm much closer to the excellence extreme. And it's a lifelong, it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process. And the key here is to accept that it will always be part of one's life, and then to say, all right, so what do I do now? In other words, it is about then taking action. Behavior. So for example, it's about coping, putting ourselves on the line. What I did initially when I first realized the perfectionism and my defensiveness, I would go out of my way and solicit criticism. And I would ask people, so, give me feedback about it. And when I received negative feedback, things that were actually deviations from the straight line, I literally held myself from, pouncing back. The best form of defense is attack very often for perfectionists. And slowly I got used to it. And I became far less defensive and was able to create much higher levels of intimacy. Or I put myself on the line in other areas where I potentially would experience a no. So let me end with a quick story. Her name was Brittany. She was a showgirl, at least to me she was. We met freshman week, and we really hit it off. We spent almost the entire freshman week out, and at the end of freshman week, wanting to overcome my perfectionism, I asked her out. And she said no. It surprised me, it floored me, it hurt me, but she said no. My sophomore year, we met again. And again, I asked her out. And this time, she said no. Junior year, towards the end of my sophomore year, junior year, I dated someone, so Brittany was out of the equation. And then we met again my senior year. We had an amazing conversation. By that time, I'd already studied psychology. I could also read her body language. She did a lot of this with her hair. And I knew that she really liked me. And I asked her out, and she said no. And I'm still here with you. And that was an important learning process. Learn to fail or fail to learn. I'll see you next week. Hi. Any announcements today? Anyone? No. Okay. Good morning. What we're going to do today is finish up on perfectionism and then move on to the mind-body. This semester for me has been going great, and there are very few things that I regret about not having done this semester. But the one thing that I will change next time when I teach the class, that I already know of now, is have the lecture on the mind-body earlier. Because I think it is such an important topic. It is so foundational, so basic, that when I realized that, and that was early on in the semester, that I should have had it earlier, I started already to plug for physical exercise, to talk about mindfulness, to introduce it a little bit on the lower level of the spiral. So today, a month or two too late perhaps, we are going to introduce the mind-body connection, physical health. But first, let me finish up on perfectionism. So remember last time we talked about the two models, the schema of the perfectionist, a straight line from point A to point B, versus the schema of the person committed to excellence, which is a much more meandering spiral kind of journey. And a couple of people yesterday in office hours asked the question, so what is really the difference? So you gave us the model of the rat racer, that person, remember, who at the age of 72 gets to being quite literally on top of the world, overlooking Central Park, and then being informed after a life of constant stress, constantly living in the future, in point B, not enjoying the present, the journey, is being told that it is time to retire. And I ask you a simple question: what kind of life do you want for yourself? So what is the alternative model? What is the positive model? Now, the positive model from the outside may look exactly the same. It may be a person who is extremely ambitious, a person who is extremely hardworking, a person who is an investment banker, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or working at a homeless shelter. It may look exactly the same from the outside. From the inside, it is radically different. How is it radically different? In that the person who's on the excellence side may be as ambitious, may have the same goals, may reach the same goals. However, that person also enjoys the journey. That is the difference. So yes, he or she gets into a top school, the school that they really wanted to get into. And at school they work extremely hard. However, they also learn and are able to mostly, there is no 100% here, but mostly enjoy their time in school, with the same ups and downs and vicissitudes natural. But enjoy school and then get into the job that they really wanted, or one of the jobs that they wanted, and work extremely hard there, and be ambitious, and work the 80-hour weeks. However, that person also overall enjoys the journey. And then they enjoy the next step and being an associate and being a partner and being the MD or whatever it is. The only difference is that they enjoy the journey. Now, I have a few role models that I know. One of them is my ex-roommate, who is an investment banker. We were in college together, also class of 96. After graduating, being an economics major, went to work for one of the premier hedge funds. After that, came back to Harvard, got his JD MBA, did extremely well here as a JD MBA, had all the offers that he wanted after, chose another hedge fund, and then went off on his own and started a firm with a few friends. Now, when I talk to him about investment banking, which I know very little about, I get very excited about investment banking because his excitement is contagious. He looks forward to work every day, and he works long hours. So he's a model of a person committed to excellence, even though from the outside it may look the exact same as the caricature, quote-unquote, that I depicted earlier. So it's not about losing our ambition. It's not about not being competitive, if that is what makes you happy. It is simply about learning to also enjoy the process, the step on the way to a destination that you deem valuable, that is important to you. Now, the question is, how do we overcome this perfectionism, this constant knot in our stomach? How do we overcome this living in the future, being afraid of the present because what if I fail? And I started to describe a few methods. The first one is being aware of it, being aware of what I want to change and what I want to maintain. Remember Ellen Langer's study about getting a more nuanced understanding of what it is that I want to change, because for a very long time I couldn't become less of a perfectionist, because associated with perfectionism was also success, and my subconscious was stopping me from letting go of perfectionism, because I thought that would also mean throwing out the baby with the bathwater, i.e. my success. But now that I have a more nuanced understanding of perfectionism, which is the incapacitating fear of failure, and I understand that I can still be as ambitious and not give up my success and yet enjoy the process, that's a better understanding, and now I can move forward. So the first step is awareness. After we have awareness, it's about going back to Dweck's notion of rewarding effort. Remember, Carol Dweck was able to change students' and adults' mindset with as little as a few hours. And sometimes these mindsets have been set in them from a very young age. The fixed versus the malleable mindset. And Carol Dweck, by teaching them the malleability, the neuroplasticity, how our brain constantly changes, by teaching them that to focus on the journey, on the effort, as opposed to the outcome, as opposed to the intelligence, was able to change their mindset. So in ourselves, we can focus on and reward our effort, our process, whether it's failure or success. Active acceptance. It will always be part of us. Now, one of the things that perfectionists very often do when they realize that they're perfectionists and that it's hurting them, they apply the perfectionist approach to overcoming perfectionism, which means I will become a perfect person who's committed to excellence. That doesn't work. That's just more perfectionism. But what active acceptance is about is saying, okay, so I'm still a perfectionist. I will always probably have part of it in me, and that's okay. And that's okay. One of the things that the Buddhists talk about is that very often our greatest challenges, what Karen Horney would call our neuroses, whether it's perfectionism, the fear of failure, whether it's anger that comes up once in a while, anxiety, whatever it is that we have, that issue. The Buddhists cognitively reframe it and say we need to look at it as a tool for growth, as a way of learning about ourselves, digging deep inside ourselves. and growing. So to look at it, okay, so this is an opportunity for growth, for personal learning, for reflection, for more empathy toward other people, whatever it is. But look at it as a tool. Accept it, and then act. So one of the TFs, do you mind seeing what it is, please? Thanks, John. The next thing, after we accept it, we go ahead and change it. And we go ahead and change it by introducing behavior. The key issue here is behavior. Now, one of the things that I did, as I told you last time, was started to solicit feedback from people, started to solicit criticism, and initially literally had to catch myself from responding, from attacking back. Why? Because the criticism is a deviation from the straight and narrow, from that schema. But over time I got used to it. It actually helped me. And now I'm much more open to criticism. Still, sometimes catch myself when I want to respond and attack back, but overall, a lot better through behavior changing attitude. Something else, putting myself on the line more, whether it was the story that I told you about Brittany, who said no a few consecutive times, and that's okay, so she said no. I'm still here, I survived. Learn to fail or fail to learn. Next, we don't always have to act out in the world, we can also act in our internal simulator. The mind doesn't know the difference between the real thing and the imaginary thing. And therefore I can imagine myself, see myself, acting as a person committed to excellence. So for example, before teaching, one of the things that I visualize is seeing myself here on stage, feeling light, calm, and accepting. In other words, the way a person committed to excellence would, as opposed to a perfectionist who would be constantly afraid of failure. And the mind doesn't know the difference, and the mind looks for consistency, and therefore I'm able to be that way, or much more likely to be that way, because of the visualization. Also, meditation in and of itself helps, and we'll talk about meditation, probably get to it on Thursday. Because meditation puts us in a state of mind of calm, of acceptance, a state of being, as opposed to a state of doing. And when we're in a state of being, we're here and now, we're enjoying the process, as opposed to constantly thinking about the destination and what will happen if I don't get to that destination. But more on that on Thursday. This is a technique, a method that I learned from Samuel Coleridge, the British philosopher, late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, one of the philosophers who influenced our own Ralph Waldo Emerson. And what Coleridge did, he had an issue with perfectionism. And perfectionism, as Winston Churchill later on said, means paralysis. And he experienced this paralysis when he came to writing. Writing was the most important thing in his life. But he really couldn't write well because he was so afraid of not writing the ultimate essay or the ultimate poem. So here is what he did. He said, well, at the end of my life, I will write my magnum opus. Until then, everything is a rough draft. And that liberated him because he wasn't worried anymore. Now, he never got to write his magnum opus. But in the meantime, he wrote dozens of beautiful poems, some of the most beautiful in the English language, and numerous very powerful, influential, and beautifully crafted essays. And they were all rough drafts, so there wasn't the pressure. This helped me a lot because what I did when I thought about this, I said, okay, so let's say one of the domains where perfectionism was very strong for me because it was an important domain, was teaching. And then I said to myself, okay, and this was close to 10 years ago, I said, in 20 years, I'm going to have a leadership institute in which I'm going to be teaching amazing workshops and seminars and lectures. Until then, everything is a rough draft. Until then, everything is preparation. And that took off. Now, I know this is a mental game. I mean, I know that I'm quote-unquote fooling myself because in 12 years from now, when that goal is actually, when I'm there 20 years later, I'm going to set another goal for 20 years later to liberate me so that I can enjoy the here and now, so that I can enjoy the process, as opposed to being stuck on having it to be a perfect, flawless, everyday experience, which it can never be. So an end goal can often be liberating. The platinum rule. So the golden rule, do not do unto others what you would not have done unto yourself, or do unto others what you would do unto yourself. The foundation of most moral systems, most religions today. The platinum rule is taking the golden rule and switching it around. And what it says is, do not do unto yourself what you would not do unto others, or rather do unto yourself what you do unto others. Now, if a good friend of yours, someone you really care about, or a family member, fails and doesn't do well, what do you do with that person? Do you reject that person? Oh, you just got a B on this exam. Or, oh, you didn't win this competition. Is that how you treat them? Or do you embrace them? And do you love them any less for it? Of course not. And yet, why do we apply these unrealistic and non-compassionate standards to ourselves? You know, the Dalai Lama, when he first was introduced to a lot of the Western culture, was baffled by one very particular thing, by our use of the word compassion. The word compassion in Tibetan is tsewe. In English, spelled T-S-E-W-E. The word in Tibetan means compassion for others as well as self. And he was really taken aback by the notion that in English, when we talk about, or in the West in general, not just in English, when we talk about compassion, we talk about compassion for others. And he said, how can you have compassion for others when you don't have compassion for yourself? The foundation is the self. The platinum rule is about having compassion for ourselves as well. Not treating ourselves differently than we would others. Having similar standards. Accepting failure in the same way that we accept it in others, in people we love. After all, why not? How do we help other people? Because very often people are in relationships with a perfectionist, or we know a friend of ours is a perfectionist. How do we help other people? The first thing that's important to make very clear is that it is extremely difficult to help other people deal with perfectionism. It mostly has to come from within. They have to want to change, because it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. I know it from research, and more than that, I know it from personal experience. And yet we can help, after accepting that it is difficult. The first most important thing to do is by example. If I can change and become more of a person committed to excellence, enjoy the journey, celebrate, even failures, even falling down once in a while, then I'm leading by example. And remember that experiment, right? People do what you do rather than what you say. Second thing to do is to tell stories about it, which is what this lecture essentially, or the last two lectures, were about. Mostly personal stories of how I moved or am moving from being a perfectionist to being more committed to excellence. So telling stories, sharing. Again, the difference between sharing and telling. Sharing, both of us get. Telling is a one-way street. And finally, another way to help other people is remembering what Carol Dweck was all about. Rewarding effort, rewarding the journey. It is so easy to fall into the trap of rewarding outcome, and so easy to forget to reward the journey. I know that it's difficult in child rearing with my kids, and it's certainly difficult in a relationship. It's certainly difficult being the boss or a friend. But to really focus on rewarding the journey, on pointing out, oh, this was a great attempt, or this was so much fun doing it. The process.